In this lesson, we're going to start with the details actually of the ТиТач body work. And we have so many different touches that we use with animals, and they're constantly, there's constant evolution. And part of that is because we find that different ways feel different to the body, and different animals, beings have different preferences on any given day to what's acceptable to them. So there's no rote method to this. If you actually learn the techniques of the method, what you'll find is that your hands then will just sort of start to go and take you where the animal may need it. So that's when the intuitive part of this work can take place. Now, if you don't feel like you have a lot of intuition, it doesn't really matter. Just learn the methods and pay attention to what your animal has to say. Now, there are videos that go with each of these. I'm having a little trouble embedding them into PowerPoint, so I'm going to use my trusty friend Pepper here, and he's going to help us in terms of seeing the techniques on this PowerPoint as well. So there are various components to the bodywork. The four basic components are the circular touches. We have various slides, we have lifts, and we have extremities, meaning that the head, the tail, the ears, the mouth, the bellies, and the legs. And within the extremities, we may use any variety of those other components in terms of using the work depending on what's acceptable. So the most important thing is to find a starting point, and that starting point is where the animal says that's acceptable to start. So that's a part that lots of times people are used to making contact by kind of ruffling their dog or petting them. And for some dogs, this is going to feel a bit strange when you change something, and that's where there's going to be various touches that you may simply explore and find out what's okay for your dog. Because that's really what matters, isn't it? What your animal says, yes, this is great. So remember that if we change the context, we change the experience. So for instance, if we're doing a little bit of the groundwork with the dog or a little bit of movement work, and we pause and we add a few touches, that's going to be quite different than kind of setting them down and saying, this is going to be good for you. So a little bit drip feeding this can be really beneficial for your animals, and see how they respond to it. Now, remember in the 9 elements, which is a video before this one, if something isn't working, change one of the elements. And that can very often make a huge difference in terms of what your dog says is acceptable. So the first one that we often use is what we call Noah's March, and that can be used either to put everything back together at the end, or it can be used as an introduction when you're making contact with the dog. So basically they're kind of long, slow connecting strokes all over the body. Now, you'll find that if you kind of slow down a little bit, you may have a better idea of where your dog's areas of concern are, because sometimes people are quite quick in terms of what they're doing, and they may be at the back end before their dog sits, but it might actually be somewhere in the middle of the back that they're saying, this is a little bit sensitive. So I often end up using the back of my hand. When I'm making contact with an animal that I don't know, and actually even some of my own animals, I just find that if I start this same kind of movement with the back of my hand, there's less heat in it, there's less threatening, there's no sense of being able to kind of grab. And you can really feel that. If someone even does that on your own back when you can't see the hand, you can really feel the difference in the temperature and just the movement of the hand. So that's one thing that you might find is useful. I find it's particularly helpful in the beginning when I'm introducing myself to a dog. Say when I went down the legs. Going down the legs for many dogs, if you use the palm of the hand, is far more threatening than if I simply go down with the back or the side of my hand. Same thing with going under the belly. If I was going to kind of just make a little check-in to see how they're comfortable about things. The same thing when we go onto the tail, or with a dog with a long tail, when we went underneath the tail. So pay attention to your dog. Now, when you're finished, you may find that these long, slow strokes are much more acceptable when you're finished working with an area, so that you can kind of integrate it together again. So the Llama touch, which we sort of touched on, if you will, in the Noah's March, is anytime we're using either the back of the fingers, any part of the back of the hand. So it could be the back of the fingers, or in some cases, it may be the back of the palm. And we primarily use that with horses, but I've certainly used that also with large dogs when I want to make quite a soft connection. So you can either use the circular touches, which is kind of where it really started, or you can use a stroke. But the true llama ТиТач is a circular stroke. So when would we use it? Great way to approach unfamiliar or fearful animals. Once again, it's that whole idea. We want to be less threatening. We can't grab with the back of the hand. It's cooler than the palm, so this is where you can often feel heat much more easily using the back of the hand rather than using the palm of your hand. It diffuses the contact because it's quite soft, so and it's a broader area of tissue. And you can kind of get a sense of which areas are okay to go in and where are sort of no-go areas. And I think that's really helpful when animals learn that we're listening to them. That makes a huge difference to them. So remember that the fingers are slightly soft so that there's a little curve to my hand. So the fingers aren't stiff. I can use circular touches, or I could use a little bit of a slide. So the zebra touch is a touch that if you've been around ТиТач for any length of time or seen some of the old material, it's also called the zigzag. And it's really, the zigzag describes the motion that you're going to be doing on the body of your animal when you're doing this move. So basically you're going to start with your fingers curved. And as my hand goes away from my body, I can flatten my fingers. And as it comes back toward my body, I'm going to curve them a little bit more. And I'm going to flatten them slightly and curve and flatten and curve. Now, if you could have just a little pause at the end of the touches, at the end of the zig or the zag, it's going to be very different than if you go really quickly. That's what I call the scrub brush approach when you go quickly. And that could wake an animal up, but could be quite irritating to them. So really pay attention to the pressure and the speed that you're doing this zebra touch. Now, this can be really helpful with some animals. It's easy for people to learn. It helps connect them back to front. You can dip into those areas of concern without really staying there. It's a little more casual than the circular touches. So some animals are really suspicious if you start to do something that's abnormal or out of the ordinary for them. And these zebra touches are a little bit like if a dog was rolling on their back in the grass. They're not quite as seeming intentional as when we start to do the circular touches. Now, many people will find that because this zebra touch is really easy to teach people, and it's easy to learn. So if you're working with excuse me, clients that have a dog that maybe has a tendency to get overly aroused, that oftentimes doing the zebra touches can make a big difference to just settling them and to settling the handler, and that can be just as important. Now, there's some variations that you can use. You can have your fingers rather curved, as I was demonstrating. You may find that with some sensitive animals, the flat of the fingers is actually easier for them to accept. And in some cases, actually using the back of the hand, particularly when you're on the same side of the dog. Now, if you don't know the dog, obviously reaching over them is not going to be very comfortable for them. So you want to stay kind of on the same side and then maybe go over a little bit, but make sure that the dog knows you and is all right with it. I've also found that a little variation, I could do this from the chimp, which is just using the backs of my fingers. So my fingers would be curved, and I'm using really the back of the nail rather than using actually the nail itself. So try different ways and see how it is for your dog and what they say. So here's a little, just a little picture, and then there's also, as I say, a video after this PowerPoint. So you can see that I'm reaching across the dog, but I'm keeping my head sort of out of the way so she has a free moving. So I'm not leaning over her with my body, just with my arm. And I can really dip in and out and go down to different places. I can go under into the belly. And this can really help to connect an animal back to front if you have dogs that just don't seem to have a good sense of their back ends. So the basic circle, I went through this a little bit in the 9 elements, but we're going to go through it again. And you can see this clock that we have, the clock face that is on the screen. So here's some things we talked about in terms of our the basic circle. We want to keep the back of the wrist straight, and that is because it helps to keep our fingers more fluid. If I have a break in my wrist, it stiffens it. And Debbie Potts often talks about you don't want to have a kink in your hose. So if the water would flow or the energy would flow freely through your wrist, it's easier if it's straight. We start at 6 on the clock, meaning that we're going to be starting with a lift rather than a slide down. We want to keep connection with our thumb rather than lifting it. Pay attention to the direction. It might be one way, might be the other, but generally clockwise. And we're thinking that we're moving the tissue as opposed to sliding across the tissue. So we want to move it. It's a very different feeling than if I'm simply rubbing across. So the clouded leopard is the hallmark, really, of the touches. And if we were to think about how would we use it, so we want to use the pads or the fingerprint part of our fingers. Our thumb is going to make contact. There's a curve in our fingers. You can see, I can move this little dog around, so that my hand is like a puffy paw. The back of the wrist is straight, and the pressure, well, sometimes it might even be a 2, but sort of a 2 to 4, 3 to 5 pressure. Just it's a more directed pressure than we use in most of the other circular touches, as far as we have a lot of variation in terms of what we might do. The heel of the hand is usually off the dog's body. And if it happens to come in contact, it could happen sometimes. It's just that if it's off, what happens is it keeps the back of the wrist straighter, because the moment I sort of lock on with the heel of my hand, what happens is I stiffen my wrist. And I want to be able to keep these fingers flowing freely. Now, what I've found is that in a lot of the literature you'll read is to pay attention to your middle finger as far as leading it. And I've found over the last couple of years, and you can experiment with this, that if you actually think about your little finger leading the movement, what I've found is it's quite easy to teach people often, because the fingers are more fluid, as opposed to in the beginning, when the fingers have this tendency to be quite stiff. And you can kind of see the difference in how that looks even on little Pepper here. So you see if there's free movement through the wrist, that's a different feeling. So because your little finger is a little shorter, what happens is I curve it to make contact. It kind of encourages the other fingers to have a little bit of flex in them as well. And that is one of the things that can really help to keep your wrist soft and your fingers really fluid. So it can really help to bring awareness to an area, can help to reduce stress. And you can use connected clouded leopard circles, these little circles with a little connection, to really help ground the dog. And actually it can help ground the person as well. So play with the clouded leopard and see what becomes your favorite way of making contact. So the raccoon touch. So in some other countries where they don't have raccoon, sometimes they call it the possum or different touches, but basically we call this the raccoon. And the idea is that raccoons actually manage to do quite a few things with their little fingers, toes. And so the idea is that my fingers are curved. So you'll see on the dog, so that I'm right in the tips of my fingers. Now my thumb is still at I'm going to just turn this dog this way, at a little bit of distance. Because sometimes people have sort of mistakenly had their thumb quite close to the fingers. And the problem with that, if my thumb is close to my fingers, it stiffens them. So I'm going to have it maybe a couple of inches away from my index finger. And the circle is going to be very small. And it's the fingertips that are making contact. And there'll be a 1 to 3 pressure. And we're thinking once again of moving tissue rather than sliding. So where would we use the raccoon touch? Well, it's great around injuries, around arthritic areas. I found that before a vaccination or before microchipping, if you can just prepare the tissue, I've used this with my children too before a vaccination, it's not that you're desensitizing, you're simply preparing the tissue to for something to happen. So a 1 or 2 pressure very lightly around that area can be really beneficial. Anytime you have a bruise, swelling, some kind of a sprain, doing these very light tissue circles around the area will really help to reduce any pain that you might be having and to help reduce the swelling. So you pay attention to that. And when if you say you have to medicate an animal, like you have to put some eye drops or eardrops, doing a little bit of touch around that area can be very helpful in preparing the area for something to happen. So the lying leopard touch is actually, the clouded leopard has a slight curve to your fingers. The raccoon, your fingers are more curved, so you're on the tips. And the lying leopard, you want to flatten your fingers out so that the first 2 flanges basically are making contact. My fingers are extended. The heel of the hand may be making contact depending on the size of the dog and the part of the body you're using on, but you don't want to force it to be there. So you can just kind of allow your hand to gently make contact. This is great for diffusing contact. So again, it's going to spread the contact out over a bigger area. You may find that it brings a little bit more warmth, for instance, than the raccoon touch does. I find it really nice around sensitive or painful areas, and we'll often use it in conjunction with the python lift, which you will learn in one of the later lessons. So just pay attention to that. I love the lying leopard. I find it often really easy to teach people. Once again, we're moving the tissue. We're not rubbing across. So you can pay attention to your fingers moving the same way as in the clouded leopard, but they're just a little bit flatter. So remember things that you can change. If an animal isn't accepting the contact, you can change the pressure, the speed, the type of touch you're using, the direction. You can simply stop or pause. Pauses are really important. You can move the dog. So you could add some of the groundwork and then add some touches, drip feed them to the dog, and then carry on at a later time. Pause. Pause is so important. And each circle, you can think about it, is that it's its own entity. So all that means is that each one of these little 1.25 circles can stand alone. If the circle is quicker, which you may find that there's times that you might use a quicker circle, I use a longer pause rather than zooming across the body. So with a lot of pain, sometimes you may find that quicker circles are a little bit easier to tolerate. They feel a little bit better. But even just doing a few touches and then giving a short break or a nice breath can make a huge difference. When you ask a dog to do something, or anybody, you give a request, if you give a moment, remember that if I have an idea about something, it has to go from my brain, and then it has to go to my body, and then it has to, if I've made contact with an animal, it has to go from their body to their brain back to their body. So if we can remember that pause is so important, and it's actually, the pause is the time that the nervous system integrates the request. And somebody said to me, one of the musicians that we had in a course said, it's the space between the notes that makes the music. And that's really kind of the same thing with the pause. This is the end of lesson 1. View this as many times as you want and have a look at the videos that will go along with this so that you can practice.